A weak and sickly horse was rejected by everyone at an auction, until one girl saw something special in him and decided to take a chance. Years later, they became champions, and what those men who once mocked him did will leave you speechless. The midday sun blazed down on the dusty wooden fences of the auction pens. The event was in full swing, a constant parade of horses brought in from various ranches across the region. Buyers, dressed in wide-brimmed hats and polished leather boots, strode confidently between the enclosures, their sharp eyes assessing each animal. Some jotted notes in small notebooks, while others whispered amongst themselves, pointing with calloused fingers at the horses they had their eyes on. The atmosphere buzzed with excitement, mixed with the restless neighing of the horses and the clinking of chains as the animals shifted in place. Every time a particularly strong or elegant horse stepped into the exhibition area, the crowd hushed in anticipation, their eyes gleaming with interest. "Look at that coat," murmured one buyer. "Powerful legs," added another with admiration. But in a forgotten corner of the auction yard, far from the eager eyes of the crowd, stood a small, frail horse. He barely moved, his head hanging low, his dull coat covered in dust. His ribs protruded sharply, and his thin legs, lacking the strength seen in the others, struggled to keep him standing. The buyers passed him by without a second glance. Some chuckled under their breath. "That one's got no future," sneered a man, shaking his head. "Not even fit to pull a cart," another said mockingly. "They should take him straight to the slaughterhouse." The horse didn't react. His sunken, lifeless eyes held no fear, only a quiet acceptance, as if he had long grown used to being overlooked, to being seen as worthless. But then, amidst the sea of indifference, a young woman stepped forward. Elena. Her chestnut hair was neatly tied back in a braid, her light eyes filled with determination. She wore a simple white shirt stained with dust, worn-out jeans, and a pair of riding boots that had seen better days. A small leather pouch hung from her shoulder, containing the savings she had earned from working on her family's ranch. She had watched the grandest, most sought-after horses pass before her eyes, but none had captured her attention. She was searching for something else, something her grandfather, a wise and patient man, had always taught her to look for. "Never judge a horse by its appearance," he would say. "Look beyond what the eyes can see." Those words echoed in her mind as she wandered through the pens. Then, she reached the forgotten corner. She stopped. Her gaze locked onto the frail horse. There was something about the way he stood, motionless, as if he had already accepted his fate. It was as if he knew no one would ever bet on him. Ignoring the mocking whispers around her, Elena slowly approached the enclosure. She rested her hands on the wooden fence and spoke softly. "What are you doing here, boy?" The horse barely lifted his head. But for just a moment, their eyes met. Elena felt a lump form in her throat. It wasn't just sadness she saw in those eyes. It was something deeper, resignation, and yet, buried beneath it, a quiet, desperate hope to be seen. What Elena saw in those eyes wasn't just sadness. It was something much deeper, a mix of resignation and a hidden, desperate desire to be seen. "What do you see in that bag of bones?" a man's voice interrupted. An older buyer stepped closer, smirking at her, his tone laced with mockery. "That's none of your business," Elena replied firmly, her gaze never leaving the horse. Slowly, she reached out her hand. At first, the horse flinched, his frail body tensing. But then, as if sensing that Elena meant no harm, he hesitantly extended his muzzle toward her fingertips. The contact lasted only a moment, brief, fragile, but it was enough. Enough for Elena to make her decision. When the auctioneer called the next lot, a murmur swept through the crowd. His voice, once booming and full of energy for the prized horses, now carried a dull tone of indifference. "Well, ladies and gentlemen," he sighed. "Here we have a young horse. A little worse for wear, but maybe someone will find a use for him." Silence. Not a single hand was raised. Some people chuckled under their breath. Others turned away as if the offer wasn't even worth considering. Then, cutting through the quiet like a blade. "I want him." Elena's voice was clear and unwavering. Gasps rippled through the audience. You're joking, one man scoffed. What could you possibly want with that thing? He's nothing but trouble. Ignoring the voices around her, Elena turned to the auctioneer. How much? The man looked at her, almost surprised that someone was actually interested. Not much, he shrugged. Just pay the minimum, and he's yours. Without hesitation, Elena reached into her pouch and handed over the money, her hands steady despite the laughter and murmurs around her. Sold, the auctioneer declared, almost relieved to be done with it. He handed her the rope that barely held the weak horse in place. Elena took a step closer, speaking softly. From now on, your name will be Tizon, she whispered, gently stroking his muzzle. Don't worry, boy. No one will ever reject you again. As she led Tizon away from the chaotic auction, she could still hear the voices behind her. That girl has no idea what she's getting into. She's going to regret this. Elena didn't look back. She walked forward, her steps steady, her heart a mix of uncertainty and hope. She didn't know what the future held for them. But one thing she did know. She had seen something in this horse that no one else had. And she wasn't about to give up on him. The journey back home was long. The sun dipped lower in the sky as they walked along a dusty trail leading to her family's ranch. With each step, Tizon wobbled, his frail legs trembling under his own weight. Elena stopped several times, letting him rest, whispering words of encouragement. Easy, boy, she murmured, running a gentle hand down his sweat-soaked neck. We're almost there. I promise, you'll never have to go through this again. The path stretched on, lined with dry fields and swaying shrubs. The wind carried the scent of earth and freedom. Elena's body ached with exhaustion, but her mind couldn't stop racing. Had she made a mistake? She had spent nearly all her savings. She had taken a risk that no one else would. But every time she looked at Tizon, at the quiet strength still flickering inside him, she knew. She had made the right choice. A horse that many considered worthless. The echoes of laughter, whispers, and skeptical glances from the auction still rang in Elena's mind. He's hopeless, they had said. But there was something about Tizon that she couldn't ignore. Maybe it was the look in his eyes. Or perhaps it was the unshakable feeling that they were meant to find each other. Elena had always believed that horses, like people, had their own essence, that sometimes, what seemed broken just needed someone to believe in it. By the time they reached the ranch, the sun was setting behind the rolling hills, casting golden and amber hues across the land. The house was simple but warm, a wooden structure surrounded by a small stable and a fenced corral. Sitting on the porch, sharpening an old tool, was her grandfather, Don Hector. A man of few words, with white hair and hands hardened by years of work. He looked up as Elena approached, his sharp eyes narrowing as they landed on the frail horse beside her. After a long pause, he finally spoke. And that horse? Elena stopped in front of the house, meeting his gaze. He's mine, Grandpa. Her words were steady, but there was a hint of nervousness in her tone. She knew Don Hector wasn't one to judge hastily, but he also never shied away from telling the hard truth. Slowly, he got up and walked toward the horse, his experienced eyes scanning every inch of Tizon. He circled him, taking in the weak stance, the dull coat, the exhaustion in his posture. Tizon barely reacted, too tired to even lift his head. Don Hector exhaled through his nose. Skin and bones, he muttered. Looks like he hasn't had a decent meal in months. Elena pressed her lips together but didn't waver. I know, Grandpa, she said quietly. But I believe he can recover. He just needs time, care, and someone who believes in him. The old man raised an eyebrow, crossing his arms. Time and care, huh? Do you know what you're saying, girl? A horse in this condition doesn't just need food and rest. It takes real work. And sometimes, they don't turn out the way you hope. I'm willing to try, Elena said without hesitation. Don Hector studied her for a long moment. Then, with a deep sigh, he nodded. If you're that sure, fine. But he's your responsibility. You'll train him, care for him, and make sure he's worth the effort. Elena smiled, gratitude shining in her eyes. Thank you, Grandpa. I won't let you down. He gestured toward the stable. Put him in the small corral for now. Tomorrow, we'll see what we can do. Elena led Tizon to the small enclosure she had prepared. Carefully, she untied the rope that had held him for so long and let him loose. But the horse didn't move. Instead, he turned his head and looked at her, as if trying to make sense of what was happening. Elena knelt down and pulled out a bucket of fresh water, placing it in front of him. Here, boy. You've earned it. Tizon drank desperately, his frail body relaxing with each sip. Elena brought him a handful of hay and then sat on the ground, watching him eat. And in that moment, she realized just how thin he truly was. But she also noticed something else. Something everyone else had overlooked. Despite his weakness, despite his past, Tizon still held his head high. Despite everything, there was still a quiet strength inside him, waiting to be set free. Tizon held his head high. The way he watched every movement around him spoke of an inner strength that hadn't faded completely. Later that night, Don Hector came to check on them. He found Elena asleep by the corral, leaning against the wooden fence. Tizon stood beside her, his ears perked slightly, as if standing guard over her rest. A small smile crossed Don Hector's face. Maybe you're right, girl, he murmured before turning back toward the house. That night, beneath a sky full of stars, a bond of trust and hope began to form between Elena and Tizon. The road ahead would be long and filled with challenges, but there was one thing no amount of ridicule or doubt could break: their unshakable belief in what they could become. The first few weeks at the ranch were tougher than Elena had expected. Tizon was in such fragile condition that every day felt like a battle. A battle to earn his trust. A battle to help him regain his strength. Even with plenty of food and fresh water, he barely ate at first. As if he had learned to survive by going without. Each morning, Elena rose before the sun, carefully preparing his hay and mixing it with supplements to restore the nutrients his body desperately needed. She spent hours sitting beside him, speaking in soft tones while he watched her. Not with fear, but with a wary curiosity. You don't have to compete with anyone, boy, she whispered one morning, stroking his thin neck. This is your time, and we're going to use it well. Then came the first real test. A few days later, Elena decided to lead him to the main corral, hoping he would stretch his legs and move more freely. But the moment she tried to guide him through the gate, Tizon froze. His entire body went rigid. His eyes, wide, filled with a fear Elena had never seen before. It's okay, easy now, she murmured, keeping a firm but gentle hold on the rope. She didn't pull. She didn't force him forward. Behind her, Don Hector watched from the fence, leaning on his wooden cane. That horse is broken on the inside, he said after a long pause. It wasn't a cruel remark, just a statement of experience. His eyes don't lie. Someone hurt him. And now, he thinks every step could be a trap. Elena exhaled, keeping her eyes on Tizon. Then we'll fix him, Grandpa, she said softly. But we'll do it his way, not ours. That day, she didn't try again. Instead, she sat down in the dirt by the gate, letting the rope rest loosely on the ground. Tizon remained frozen at first. But slowly, ever so slowly, his body relaxed. They sat like that for hours, in a silence broken only by the wind and the distant songs of birds. The next day, they tried again. And the day after that. Every tiny step that Tizon took toward the corral was a victory in Elena's eyes. The progress was slow, painfully so. But she celebrated every moment as if it were the biggest achievement in the world. And then, one day, he crossed the gate. For the first time. Elena felt a lump rise in her throat. She reached out, brushing a hand over his neck, her voice thick with emotion. I knew you could do it, boy. I knew you could do it, Elena whispered, smiling as she stroked Tizon's neck. But their journey was far from over. the physical training was just as difficult. Tizan barely had the strength to trot. He tired quickly, his thin legs struggling to carry him. Elena knew she had to build his endurance gradually. At first, she simply walked him around the corral, guiding him with patience. Then, she introduced short, gentle runs, always careful not to push him too hard. Some days, he showed progress, his steps more confident. Other days, exhaustion or lingering fear held him back. But through it all, one thing about Tizan never failed to amaze Elena. His determination. No matter how weak he was, no matter how close he seemed to giving up, he always found the strength to take one more step. At first, Don Hector watched from a distance, his arms crossed with skepticism. But as the days passed, he began to get involved, offering advice drawn from years of experience. "Don't rush him," he told Elena one afternoon as she worked with Tizan. "A horse doesn't just need strength in his body, he needs it in his mind. If he trusts you, he'll do things no one thought possible." One evening, while Elena was grooming Tizan after training, Don Hector approached, holding an old wooden brush. "Need a hand?" he asked, extending it to her. Elena smiled and nodded. As she ran her hands over Tizan's back, Don Hector began brushing his neck in slow, steady strokes. At first, Tizan tensed. But as the experienced hands moved over him, he gradually relaxed. Don Hector chuckled softly. "You know, this horse reminds me of one I had when I was young," he mused. "Just as stubborn. Just as wary. But once he trusted me. I never knew a horse more loyal." Elena glanced at him curiously. "What happened to him?" Her grandfather's smile held a trace of nostalgia. "He became the best horse I ever had. But only because I gave him time." You never rush a horse, Elena. They teach you patience. And if you listen to them, they give you back everything you put into them. That night, as Elena sat by the corral, watching Tizan rest under the stars, she thought about her grandfather's words. She was certain of one thing. Tizan was special. Even if no one else had seen it. Months passed. Under Elena's unwavering care, Tizan began to transform. His once frail body grew stronger, his muscles filling out. His dull, lifeless coat turned sleek and dark, glistening under the sunlight. His movements, once hesitant and weak, became smoother, more confident. But the biggest change wasn't in his body. It was in his eyes. Where there had once been fear and resignation, now there was trust. Hope. Elena knew they still had a long way to go. But every single day, she became more certain. That moment at the auction had been the best decision of her life. One afternoon, as Elena guided Tizan through the corral, Don Hector approached, carrying a rope and an old saddle that had been hanging in the barn for years. "It's time for this boy to feel what it's like to carry a rider," he said, a smile playing on his lips, one filled with both pride and challenge. Elena turned to Tizan. The horse stood calmly, his ears flicking at the sound of their voices. He had come so far. But now, the real test was about to begin. Tizan grazed peacefully, his ears relaxed. Despite all the progress they had made, this next step was delicate. One mistake could shatter the trust they had worked so hard to build. "Do you think he's ready?" Elena asked, running a hand gently along Tizan's neck. Don Hector placed the saddle on the fence, studying the horse carefully. "We won't know until we try," he replied. "But if anyone can do it, it's you. He trusts you." That night, Elena lay awake longer than usual, her mind racing. Ever since she had bought Tizan, she had dreamed of competing in equestrian events. Not just for the glory, but to prove that it didn't matter where a horse came from. Every horse had the potential for greatness. But she didn't want to rush him. At sunrise, Elena led Tizan into the corral. The saddle sat waiting in the corner. She took her time, letting him become familiar with it. First, she placed it nearby, allowing him to sniff and inspect it. Then, moving slowly and carefully, she laid it across his back without fastening it. Tizan stiffened. His ears twitched, and he turned his head, trying to see what was happening. Elena murmured softly, stroking his side, reassuring him. Little by little, he began to relax. It was a slow process, but every step was necessary. Every moment built on the trust they had fought to establish. When the saddle was finally secured, Don Hector stepped forward. "All right, girl," he said, nodding. "Now let's see how he reacts when you get on." Elena took a deep breath but didn't rush. Instead, she led Tizon in circles around the corral, letting him move with the saddle on his back. At first, he stumbled a couple of times, shifting awkwardly under the unfamiliar weight. But with each lap, he adjusted. Slowly, the discomfort faded. Finally, Elena exhaled and stepped up beside him. "All right, boy. Let's try this together." With slow, steady movements, she placed her foot in the stirrup and lifted herself into the saddle. Tizon froze. Every muscle in his body tensed. As if he had no idea what to do next. Elena remained perfectly still, letting him process the moment. "That's it, boy," she whispered. "You're doing just fine." She leaned forward slightly, running a calming hand down his neck. Tizon let out a deep, shaky breath. And then, he took a step forward. It was hesitant, unsteady. But then another step. And another. Slowly, his steps grew sure. Elena felt a swell of emotion rise in her chest. Not only was he accepting her weight, he was starting to move naturally beneath it. From the fence, Don Hector watched, a satisfied smile on his face. "See," he said, voice gruff with approval. He was never broken. He just needed someone to remind him of what he was capable of. That day marked a new beginning for them both. Now that Tizon had accepted the saddle, the next step was preparing him for competition. Elena knew that equestrian events required more than just skill. They demanded discipline, precision, and most of all, a deep connection between horse and rider. Weeks later, it was time to leave the safety of the ranch. Tizon needed to face the world outside. Elena decided to take him to the open fields nearby. A place where he could experience new terrains, new sounds, new challenges. But their first ride outside the ranch was a disaster. The rustling of the wind through the trees. The crackling of branches beneath their hooves. Every unfamiliar noise sent Tizon into a nervous frenzy. And then, out of nowhere, he bolted. The rustling of the trees. The snapping of branches beneath their hooves. Each sound sent a nervous tremor through Tizon's body. Then, without warning, he leaped sideways in a panic, nearly throwing Elena from the saddle. "Easy, boy," she said, tightening her grip on the reins, but never pulling. "I'm here. We're in this together." She spoke softly, her voice steady despite the rush of adrenaline. And little by little, he calmed. The first ride outside the ranch was difficult, but they kept trying. Every day, Tizon grew a little braver. He learned to trust, not just in Elena, but in himself. The connection between them deepened. Anyone who watched them could see it. One afternoon, as Don Hector stood by the fence with an old friend, he couldn't help but smile. "That horse isn't just strong," he murmured, watching them move as one. "He's got heart. And that's because of her." The turning point came during training one evening. Elena had set up a small jump course, simple but challenging enough. At first, Tizon hesitated. His steps were clumsy, his timing off. But Elena was patient. They repeated the course over and over, until slowly, he started to understand. And then, it happened. He cleared the jump perfectly, his hooves soaring over the bars without touching them. Elena let out a joyous cry, wrapping her arms around his neck the moment they landed. "You did it, boy. I knew you could." That night, as she sat on the porch beneath a sky full of stars, she let herself dream. They weren't ready for the big leagues yet. But for the first time since she had bought him, she knew, deep in her heart, Tizon was ready to face the world. Months passed, and they trained relentlessly. What had once been shaky, uncertain steps became graceful, precise movements. Tizan no longer just cleared jumps, he soared over them. The connection between them was undeniable. But for Elena, the real challenge lay ahead. Competing against the world. One morning, as she studied the local competition schedule, Don Hector approached, coffee in hand. "Well," he asked. "Have you made up your mind?" Elena sighed, setting down the paper. "There's a competition in town next month, but I don't know if we're ready. There's still so much to work on." Don Hector leveled her with a serious look. "Listen, girl. No one starts out perfect. If you keep waiting for the perfect moment, it'll never come." He nodded toward Tizan. "He's ready. And so are you. The only thing missing," he tapped a finger against her chest, "is for you to believe it." Inspired by his words, Elena filled out the registration form. It was just a small, local event for beginners. But it was their first real step into the world of competition. And the thought of riding in front of a crowd, alongside experienced riders, sent nervous energy coursing through her veins. The day of the competition arrived faster than she expected. Elena prepared Tizan with great care, brushing his coat until his black fur shone under the morning light. She adjusted the saddle with precision, making sure everything was perfect. "Ready, boy?" she asked, looking into his deep, steady eyes. Tizan let out a soft nicker, as if he understood exactly what was at stake. When they arrived at the event grounds, the noise was overwhelming. The chatter of spectators. The rhythmic clatter of hooves against the ground. The crisp commands of riders guiding their horses. Tizan shifted uneasily, his ears flicking back and forth, nostrils flaring at every sudden sound. Elena kept her hands steady on the reins, whispering to him as they walked. "Stay with me, boy. We've got this." But as their names were called to the arena, her heart pounded. This was it. Their first chance to prove themselves. Would Tizan rise to the occasion? Or would their journey end before it even truly began? Elena kept her hands steady on the reins, guiding Tizan with quiet confidence. "Easy, boy," she whispered, stroking his neck. "We're in this together." As their turn approached, she felt the weight of countless eyes on them. Spectators and competitors alike whispered among themselves. "Isn't that the scrawny horse from the auction?" someone muttered near the railing. "Yeah, looks like they patched him up. But I doubt he's competition," another laughed. Elena clenched her jaw, blocking out their words. They didn't matter. She knew the truth, Tizan was more than they could ever see. Finally, their names were called. A surge of adrenaline coursed through her veins. With a firm, practiced movement, she mounted Tizan and guided him into the arena. The course was set, a simple layout, but one that required precision and trust. Elena took a deep breath, adjusted the reins, and gave the signal. Tizan stepped forward with a steady trot, his movements controlled. Within seconds, his trot transformed into a smooth, graceful lope. The first jump was low, effortless. Then came a taller obstacle. Tizan hesitated for a split second, then surged forward, clearing it with power and grace. The crowd fell silent. Every jump, every turn was a testament to the hard work they had put in. They weren't perfect, but they were in sync. A team moving as one. For Elena, this wasn't about winning. It was about proving, to herself, to Tizan, to everyone watching, that they had come this far together. When they crossed the finish line, the silence broke into applause. Not everyone understood what they had just witnessed. But those who did could see the sheer effort and dedication behind it. Elena leaned forward, wrapping her arms around Tizan's neck. "You did it, boy," she whispered, a mix of relief, pride, and gratitude swelling in her chest. In the resting area, some of the other competitors approached her. One of them, a young rider named Manuel, studied Tizan with curiosity. "This is the same horse I saw at the auction a few months ago, isn't it?" he asked. Elena smiled, running her fingers through Tizon's mane. Yes, she said, voice filled with quiet pride. His name is Tizon. And he's more than anyone ever thought. Manuel's expression softened with admiration. You've done something incredible, he said. That horse has something special, and so do you. When the results were announced, Elena wasn't expecting much. This was their first competition, after all. But then, 3rd place. She blinked in disbelief. As she stepped forward to accept her medal, a realization settled over her. This wasn't just about proving Tizon's worth to the world anymore. It was about embracing the journey they were on together. That night, as they returned to the ranch, Don Hector was waiting for them on the porch. A familiar look of pride and warmth softened his face. I knew you'd do it, girl, he said. But this is just the beginning. Elena looked at Tizon, the moonlight catching the sleek shine of his coat. I know, Grandpa, she said, smiling. And we're ready for whatever comes next. The days after the competition were filled with excitement and change. Their victory had drawn attention. For Elena and Tizon, the joy of their accomplishment still lingered. But so did the weight of something new. One morning, as Elena was feeding Tizon in the stable, Don Hector walked in, a letter in his hand. It's for you, girl, he said. Looks like someone was impressed. Elena wiped her hands on her apron and took the envelope. Inside was an invitation. A chance to compete in a prestigious regional event. One far bigger than the small local competition they had just conquered. Her hands trembled slightly as she read the organizer's note. We have watched your dedication and the undeniable bond you share with your horse. We believe Tizon has great potential, and it would be an honor to have you both compete. Elena exhaled, excitement and nerves twisting in her stomach. This was it. The next step. And there was no turning back now. Participating in an event of this magnitude meant facing the best, but it was also an opportunity to prove even more the worth of Tizon. What do you think, Grandpa? She asked, showing him the letter. Don Hector read it carefully and nodded. I believe this is the next step, but be prepared. The higher you rise, the more critical the eyes watching you will be. And so, they began training again. But this time, the expectations were higher. Elena hired an experienced trainer to help them refine their technique. Luis, the trainer, was a serious but fair man, who quickly noticed something special in Tizon. This horse has heart, but also an indomitable spirit, he commented one day as he watched him jump. That combination is rare. Just make sure he never loses the trust he has in you. That's what makes him unique. The day of the regional event came faster than Elena expected. The venue was impressive, with stands full of spectators and riders on perfectly trained horses. Tizon, although nervous, seemed more confident than in the previous competition. His posture was firm, and his ears pointed forward, alert to every move Elena made. As they warmed up, Elena noticed a group of men watching them from a distance. At first, she paid them no mind, but soon she recognized one of them. It was the auctioneer who had sold Tizon months ago. Is that the horse no one wanted to buy? Asked one of the men, his voice filled with surprise and admiration. Yes, but it seems the girl saw something we didn't. Look at what she's done with him, replied another. Elena pretended not to hear them, focusing on her preparation. However, just before she went out onto the field, one of the men approached. He was robust, with an expression of confidence that bordered on arrogance. Excuse me, miss. My name is Rodrigo. I was at the auction where you bought this horse. I must admit, I never imagined he'd get this far. It's impressive what you've accomplished. Elena simply nodded, not letting her guard down. In fact, continued Rodrigo, I'd like to make you an offer. I'm willing to buy this horse from you for a substantial amount. What do you think? Elena lifted her chin and looked him directly in the eye. He's not for sale. Tizon isn't just a horse to me. He's my partner. Elena and Tizon entered the arena with determination. The obstacles were higher, and the course more complex than anything they had faced before, but she trusted her horse completely. With each jump and every turn, they showed they were not just up to the challenge, they could overcome it. The connection between them was palpable, and by the end of the course, the audience erupted into applause. Although they didn't win first place, they came in second, a remarkable achievement for their first regional competition. But for Elena, the most important thing wasn't the trophy. It was the confirmation that she and Tizan were an unbeatable team. That night, as they returned to the ranch, Elena reflected on what had happened. She knew that success would attract more attention, and with it, more challenges. But no matter how many offers or criticisms they faced, Tizan would always be more than just a horse. He was her partner, her friend, and together they were ready to conquer whatever came next. If you're enjoying the story, I invite you to subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and a comment. Our goal is 1,000 subscribers. Now, let's continue the story. Elena and Tizan continued to climb in the world of equestrian competitions. What had started as a dream was now turning into a remarkable journey, and the connection between them was the key to their success. Every competition brought new lessons, reminding them of how far they had come since that auction where everyone had rejected Tizan. However, with fame came new challenges. After the regional event, rumors about the rejected horse who became a champion started circulating in equestrian circles. Some considered him an inspiring example, while others viewed him with skepticism. One afternoon, while Elena was practicing in the ranch corral, a sleek car stopped at the entrance. A tall man in a perfectly tailored suit got out. He seemed out of place in such a rustic environment. "Are you Elena Martinez?" he asked in a firm voice. Elena dismounted from Tizan, observing him with curiosity as she led the horse toward the fence. "Yes, I am. How can I help you?" "My name is Alberto Montoya. I represent one of the most prestigious horse breeding farms in the country." He handed her a business card. "I've been following your progress in the competitions, and I must say I'm impressed. Your horse, Tizan, is exceptional." Elena took the card but didn't stop observing him cautiously. "Thank you. We've worked hard to get here." "That's clear," Montoya said, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. "And that's precisely why I'm here. My client is very interested in acquiring Tizan. He's willing to offer you a considerable amount, more than any prize you could win in a competition." Elena felt a tightness in her chest. The offer was no different from the one she had received at the regional event, but this time it came with a professionalism that made her uncomfortable. "He's not for sale," she replied firmly, stroking Tizan's neck as she mounted. Montoya didn't seem surprised. "I understand your attachment to the horse, but I want you to consider what you could achieve with that. You could buy a horse with better lineage, one that would take you to the highest level of this sport," Montoya said. Elena stepped forward, positioning Tizan behind her as if to protect him. "I don't know if you understand what this horse means to me. He's not just a tool for competition. He's my friend, my partner. Everything we've achieved together. No amount of money can buy that." Montoya looked at her for a moment before shrugging. "It's a shame, but let me make something clear. In this world, feelings won't take you far. Greatness has a price, and sooner or later, you'll have to decide if you're willing to pay it." With those words, he turned and walked back to his car. Elena watched him leave with a mixture of anger and determination burning in her chest. That night, while she cleaned the stables, she shared the conversation with Don Hector. He listened in silence, leaning on the pitchfork he used to move the hay. "Those men always show up when they see something shining," he finally said. "But the real question is, why are you on this path, Elena? If you're doing it for glory, maybe they'll convince you one day. But if you're doing it for something more, then nothing they offer will make you doubt." Elena thought about his words as she looked at Tizan, who was resting peacefully in his stall. Her gaze softened as she remembered the moments when the world had rejected him, and how together they had defied all the odds. "I'm not in this for the trophies, Grandpa," she finally responded. I'm here because I want to prove that worth doesn't depend on what others think, and because Tizan deserves to shine, not for them, but for himself. Don Hector nodded with a smile. Then go on, girl. But don't forget, the higher you climb, the more they'll try to bring you down. Elena knew he was right. As her reputation grew, so would the challenges. But she was determined to protect what they had built, no matter the cost. With that resolution, they continued training, preparing for the next big event, the National Show Jumping Championship. There, they would face not only the best in the country but also the expectations and prejudices that still weighed on them. For Elena, there was no greater satisfaction than proving once again that Tizan was much more than just a horse. He was a champion, in body and spirit. The day of the National Show Jumping Championship arrived, with the air charged with tension and excitement. For Elena, this was not just an event. It was an opportunity to show that she and Tizan belonged at the highest level of equestrian sport. The venue where the championship would take place was imposing, with massive stands full of spectators and an electric atmosphere filled with voices and the sounds of neighing. Horses of impeccable lineage and experienced riders walked through the warm-up area, each radiating confidence. Ready for this, girl? Don Hector asked, placing a firm hand on Elena's shoulder as they watched the course from a distance. She took a deep breath and looked at Tizan, who, despite the chaos around them, was calm and alert, as if he knew that. This was their moment. We're doing this, Grandpa. No matter what happens, we'll do it together. The tests were divided into 2 stages, an initial course with medium-height obstacles, followed by a second, more technical and challenging circuit. Only the best would move on to the second round, and Elena knew that every jump had to be perfect if she wanted to advance. When their turn was announced, murmurs spread through the stands. While many had heard of Elena and Tizan, others still doubted that a horse rejected at an auction could compete against animals specifically bred for these events. Elena mounted calmly, adjusting the reins as she guided Tizan onto the course. The crowd fell silent as they positioned themselves at the starting line. Let's go, boy. This is our chance, Elena whispered, gently stroking Tizan's neck. The whistle blew, and Tizan took off with a smooth gallop. The first obstacle was a high, wide triple jump. With a powerful movement, Tizan cleared it effortlessly, earning a few tentative claps from the crowd. One by one, the obstacles fell to the horse's skill and Elena's precision. Every turn, every jump, was a testament to the tireless work they had put in. When they crossed the finish line with no penalties, the stands erupted in applause. Number 47, Elena Martinez and horse Tizan qualify for the second round with an excellent time, the announcer declared. Elena exhaled deeply, smiling as she petted Tizan. We did it, boy. We did it. In the resting area, she received both admiring and skeptical glances from other competitors. Some came over to congratulate her, while others kept their distance, watching her with doubt. Among those who approached was Manuel, the young rider she had met at the regional competition. I knew you had something special, but this was incredible, he said with a genuine smile. Thank you, Manuel. Tizan is the one doing all the work, Elena replied modestly, scratching his neck. As she watched the other competitors complete their turns, each showing impressive skills, Elena felt the weight of the moment. When her turn came again, she could feel the eyes of the public and the judges fixed on them. The pressure was even greater this time, but Elena knew she had to focus on what really mattered, her connection with Tizan. The second course was a monumental challenge. On the third obstacle, a complicated zigzag combination, Tizan hesitated for a moment, but with Elena's steady guidance, he regained his rhythm and cleared it smoothly. Elena could feel her heart racing as they approached the last obstacle, a towering double jump that seemed designed to intimidate. Tizan galloped forward with determination, and with a powerful leap, they soared through the air, landing cleanly on the other side without touching the bars. The crowd exploded in cheers. Elena lowered her head toward Tizan, whispering words of gratitude, while the announcer declared their time, the second best in the entire competition. Elena and Tizan stood on the podium to receive the silver medal. Although it wasn't gold, for Elena, this achievement was far more meaningful. In the stands, Don Hector smiled proudly while Manuel applauded from the crowd. But among the attendees, Elena also recognized familiar faces, Rodrigo and Montoya, watching from afar with expressions that alternated between awe and envy. As she held the medal in her hands, Elena whispered, "This is just the beginning, Tizon. Together, we'll go even further." That night, back at the ranch, Elena and Don Hector celebrated in silence, gazing at the stars from the porch. For Elena, success wasn't measured by trophies or medals but by the strength of the connection she shared with Tizon. And that bond was unbreakable. Months after the national championship, Elena and Tizon had become recognized figures within the circuit. Their story inspired many, especially those who also believed in second chances. But with fame came a new wave of attention that would soon test everything Elena had built with Tizon. One crisp morning, while training at the ranch, Don Hector came running from the house with a serious expression. In his hand, he held a newspaper. "Girl, you need to see this," he said, handing it to her. Elena stopped writing and took the paper. On the front page was a picture of her and Tizon from the last championship, accompanied by a bold headline, "The Rejected Horse, the Unexpected Champion Everyone Wants to Buy." The article not only recounted their rise in the competitions but also mentioned details about the auction where Tizon had been overlooked. Now, several breeders and businessmen were offering enormous sums to acquire him. "They can't be serious," Elena muttered, upset. "Believe it," Don Hector replied. "Since you won that silver medal, everyone has set their sights on you and Tizon." Before she could respond, a black car stopped at the ranch entrance, and 3 elegantly dressed men stepped out. Elena recognized one of them immediately, Rodrigo, the man who had tried to buy Tizon at the regional championship. "What do they want now?" Elena asked quietly, while Don Hector moved toward the men. "Take it easy, girl. Let's hear what they have to say, but remember who you are and why you're doing this," her grandfather advised, opening the stable door to welcome them. Rodrigo didn't waste time getting to the point. "Miss Martinez, I know we've met before, but today I come with a formal offer. My client is willing to pay $5 million for your horse. That includes a contract for you as a trainer at our facilities." Elena crossed her arms, maintaining a firm posture. "I told you before, Tizon is not for sale, not for $5 million, not for 10. No matter how much you offer me." Rodrigo smiled with confidence, as if he were used to no one turning down such a high figure. "Understand, Miss Martinez, this isn't just a business deal. It's an opportunity for you. You could train other horses, compete at international levels. Why? Why limit yourself to just one horse?" Rodrigo's voice held a challenge. Elena felt her blood boil. She stepped forward, pointing towards Tizon, who was watching them from the corral. "Do you know what that horse means to me?" Elena said, her voice firm. "When all of you rejected him, I saw what he really was, a fighter, a champion. Everything I've achieved has been with him, not because he has perfect lineage, but because he has heart. And that's something you'll never understand." The men exchanged glances, surprised by the strength of her response. Rodrigo tried one last argument. "We understand your emotional connection, but emotions don't win competitions, miss. Think about it. $5 million is more money than you'll ever see in your life." Elena took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. Finally, she raised her chin and looked Rodrigo directly in the eyes. "Tizon has no price. He's my partner, my family, and I will never betray him for money. So if you're done trying to convince me, I'd appreciate it if you'd leave." Rodrigo frowned, but he knew he had nothing else to say. Without another word, he and his companions returned to the car and drove away from the ranch. When the sound of the engine faded, Don Hector chuckled. "That'll give them something to think about. I don't think they'll bother you again." Elena smiled, though she could still feel the adrenaline in her chest. She watched Tizon, who was now running freely around the corral, and walked over to him. When she reached his side, she rested her forehead against his, closing her eyes. I promise to protect you, remember? No matter what happens, we'll always be together. Tizan snorted softly, as if he understood every word. That evening, as the sun set over the ranch, Elena sat with Don Hector on the porch. Do you think I made the right decision? She asked, gazing into the horizon. The old man adjusted his hat before responding. A right decision isn't always the easiest or most profitable one, but if you can sleep at night knowing you didn't betray what you love, then yes, you made the right decision. Elena nodded silently. In her heart, she knew that the true value of Tizan wasn't in what others offered for him, but in everything they had built together. Years passed, but the bond between Elena and Tizan never weakened. Though they didn't win every championship they entered, they achieved the most important thing: they inspired others to believe in potential that, at first glance, seemed invisible. Tizan became a legend, not only for his achievements in the arena but for his story of overcoming the odds. Every time Elena told how she had bought him at an auction where no one else saw his worth, the faces of those listening lit up with amazement and admiration. One day, after a training session at the ranch, Don Hector approached with an old notebook in his hands. Elena, who was brushing Tizan under the sun, looked at him with curiosity. "What's that, Grandpa?" she asked, setting the brush aside. "It's something you should start writing," he replied, handing her the notebook. "Your story and Tizan's. Not to brag, but so others can read it and understand what it really means to never give up." Elena opened the notebook, her heart swelling with pride as she realized how much she and Tizan had truly accomplished together. Elena smiled as she looked at the empty pages of the notebook. "Do you think anyone will want to read it?" she asked. Don Hector looked at her with a proud smile. "Believe me, girl, that story can change lives." Inspired by her grandfather's words, Elena began writing at night while Tizan rested in his stall. She remembered every detail of their journey together: the auction, the training, the championships, and the moments when they almost gave up. But she also wrote about the strength of their bond, and how Tizan taught her that the true value of a champion is not in their lineage but in their heart. When the notebook was full, Elena decided to publish it as a book titled Tizan, The Story of the Horse No One Wanted. The book was a success, not only among horse lovers but also among everyone who had ever felt underestimated by the world. Meanwhile, Tizan enjoyed his retirement years on the ranch. Though he no longer competed, he still galloped energetically, played in the corral, and received affection from the children who visited to learn about caring for horses. One day, a little boy approached Elena shyly. "Is this the horse from the book?" he asked, pointing to Tizan, who was grazing peacefully under a tree. "Yes, it's him," Elena replied with a smile. And really, no one wanted him. She bent down to the boy's level. No one wanted him at first, but he was always special. He just needed someone to believe in him. The boy looked at Tizan with admiration before running toward him, laughing as he stroked the horse's soft coat. That night, as Elena gazed at the stars from the porch, Don Hector, now older, sat beside her. "Do you realize what you've accomplished, girl? Tizan didn't just change your life, he changed many lives. That horse wasn't just a champion, he became a symbol of hope." Elena looked over at Tizan, resting under the same starry sky. "He taught me everything, Grandpa. I don't know if I saved him, or if it was the other way around." Don Hector smiled. "Maybe it was a bit of both." That night, Elena went to bed knowing she had fulfilled the promise she made to Tizan from the beginning: to protect him, care for him, and show the world his true value. And so, the story of a horse rejected at an auction became a legend, not just on the tracks, but in the hearts of everyone who had ever dreamed of overcoming the impossible. If you made it to the end of the story, I'd love for you to leave a comment rating the story from 1 to 10. I'd also love to know where you're listening from. And if you enjoy these heartwarming animal stories, don't forget to share.